Hola, amiga. Welcome to the Latina Leadership Podcast, a podcast by Latinas for all women. Get ready because today's conversation is really special. Hola, and welcome to another episode of the Latina Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea, and we talk a lot on this show about strength, resilience, how we carry things, how we push through, how we show up for our families, our communities, our jobs, and we are so good at it. We have generations of practice. But I've been thinking about what it costs us to carry that weight without ever setting it down. You know, for many of us, the idea of therapy feels complicated. It can feel like a luxury we can't afford. It can feel like a betrayal of the family code that says, que pasa en casa se queda. It can feel like admitting weakness in a world that already expects us to fail. But what if healing isn't about rejecting our culture? What if it's about continuing the legacy our parents started when they crossed borders, learned new languages, and built lives from nothing? What if healing is the next generation of survival? And today we are honored to share the voice of Lucia Fernandez, a licensed therapist who helps Latinas untangle the patterns that were never ours to carry. And this is a conversation about breaking cycles, not by abandoning where we come from, but by finally giving ourselves what our ancestors couldn't. I have the honor of talking to Lucia and having her answer some of our deepest questions about what it actually means to heal, not as a concept, but as a practice. And I want to share her voice with you now. So we asked Lucia, in your work, what does breaking generational cycles look like in practice, and how does systems therapy help facilitate that healing? And let us watch her answer. Let me take my headphones here, and let's watch.
Breaking generational cycles in practice could mean interrupting patterns that quietly travel across time. It could look like trauma responses. It could look like communication styles, beliefs about worth, power, safety, love, gender roles. It could be conflict, beliefs about silence, or maybe being too independent, because especially as Latinas being first generation, we grow up being the ones that are paving the way for our parents and really paving the way for ourselves. So hyper independence, addiction, even cutting people off emotionally, which can sound very taboo, especially for, Latino culture, where we're taught that like family and familia represents everything. So sometimes breaking generational cycles is meaning that it can look like doing something out of the norm that your family may not perceive it as being healthy, and definitely knowing that you're doing it for the future of yourself, the future of your children, and being able to, not necessarily assimilate into American culture, but assimilate into like healthy culture. So that is how breaking generational cycles can look like in practice. But in therapy, breaking cycles, it doesn't have to look dramatic. So it can look very microscopic and radical at the same time. It looks like a parent realizing, I shut down when my child cries because no one responded when I cried. So they may have that aha moment of, nobody gave this to me, but I am going to provide this space for my child. And in therapy, they can realize that they just being emotionally available is a step into breaking generational cycles. So it doesn't necessarily have to be huge. Every tiny little step counts. And it really just starts with learning what healthy versus unhealthy is. It could look like someone noticing they chose partners, or they tend to choose partners who feel familiar, like their parents, not safe, and tracing that familiarity back to childhood dynamics. It could look like a teenager learning that anger is in danger, or a caregiver discovering they can't set boundaries without abandoning people. It looks like families replacing secrecy with language, reactivity with repair, or even just fear with curiosity, and taking a step into the right direction and being a little bit more fearless. So systems therapy helps because it refuses to treat people as isolated units. It kind of tells us that as humans, we are in ecosystems, and we're shaped by families, schools, neighborhood, immigration systems, healthcare systems, which is like a big topic right now, which we're going to get into in a minute. Racial hierarchies, unfortunately, also a big topic right now, sadly. Economic pressure, which the economy definitely contributes towards breaking generational cycle, having that wealth or generational wealth. Religious communities, court systems, or even workplaces. So symptoms rarely arise just in a vacuum. They're not just in a space, it's all around us. So instead of asking what's wrong with us, we should ask what relationships taught this behavior. Was it our parents? Was it our caregivers? Was it our environment? Was it our school system? Was it that we grew up in a neighborhood where we weren't necessarily accepted? Who carried this first? Was it my parents? Is it me? What environment rewarded it? Did people around me reinforce this? What was happening historically, culturally, structurally when this pattern formed? Think about the children that are being raised right now. I have a 17-year-old, and the system is very different from when I grew up without social media and even just the political nature of what is today. What benefits when it continues, and who pays the cost of not breaking the generational cycles? So that's pretty much somewhat of what breaks. It's a very over-encompassing question of breaking generational cycles. But in some, there is no right or wrong way. But definitely, if I had to break it down in simplest terms, is being able to analyze dynamics that really shaped you, whether it is environment, family, or anything of that like, and being able to deconstruct, learn what's healthy, and take small steps into healthier directions. And that is not easy. And it takes having healthy support systems all around, but it definitely starts like right here and right here. And a lot of it is fear or confidence or self-esteem.
What an amazing response from Lucia. And, she asked the question, who pays the cost of not breaking it? And that question shifts everything, because the answer is never just us. It's our children. It's the way we show up or don't in our relationships. It's the ceiling we hit in our careers because we don't know how to ask for more without feeling like we're asking for too much. Remember last episode? It's exhaustion we carry that we mistake for normal. Systems therapy asks us to zoom out, to stop treating our struggles as personal failings and start seeing them as responses to environments that were never designed for us to drive. And that isn't an excuse. It's an invitation. It's if these patterns were learned, they can be unlearned. If they were built, they can be rebuilt. So if healing is possible, why don't we go? And we asked Lucia this question, what are the most common barriers, cultural, financial, or emotional, that prevent Latinas from seeking therapy, and how can we begin to overcome them? So let's watch her response.
Culturally, one of the biggest barriers is the inheritance of survival first values. So many Latina families come from lineages shaped by migration, colonialism, political instability, poverty, labor exploitation, medical neglect, and many much more. So when survival is the organizing principle of all of this, emotional exploration can definitely look like a luxury. So oftentimes, being in survival is normal. And if you don't live outside of your home and you've, up until the point that you actually move out and you interact with different sorts of people, we don't really know what anything else other than what we grew up with looks like. So survival is so embedded in our culture. You look at the immigration of, people who immigrate. Obviously, most of the time you hear that they come with a few dollars in their pocket. They don't know the language. So survival is embedded. And our parents are usually, as first generation, we see our parents go through very much just surviving, whether it's to put food on the table or be able to just wake up the next day and function, not having luxuries or privileges that other people have, such as healthcare or resources. So we learn to survive things. And it's almost like passed down anxiety. So, pain gets normalized, strength is equated with endurance. And then silence becomes a form of respect. So family loyalty becomes sacred. And all messages like we handle things at home, you don't air dirty laundry, others have it way worse. Pray about it and see what happens. Just pray to God that something is going to happen good for you. Just kind of sit there and wait. Or you know what, you're being dramatic, or te crees mucho, like you think you're all that if you're working on your self-esteem. So therapy kind of feels like betrayal rather than care. So that's often another reason why there is so much, stigma around therapy, and what that becomes a barrier in and of itself. Another barrier is stigma. So it could sometimes be explicit. It sometimes can be very whispered. So, therapy can be associated with being loca or being weak or unstable, incapable of managing life. Like, oh, you need to go talk to somebody, or oh, you're only paying them to listen. So for first gen women, especially, the pressure to be the translator, the stabilizer, the caretaker, the strong one, it often leaves little room to admit vulnerability. So when you've been carrying like a lot of that on your back, asking for help can often feel like dropping the load and risk spilling everything, especially in school systems where they fear that, DCFS is going to be called, or, you go to therapy when you're a teenager and you hear stuff like, what is in here is confidential unless someone's hurting you, you're hurting someone, or you think of hurting yourself. Well, oftentimes, what people don't know is that suicidal thoughts are very normal to feeling hopeless and very normal to depression. And that doesn't mean that gets reported. We only report if there's like a major crisis and there's impending suicidality, where there is a plan of action and there's danger. So oftentimes, not having that education really determines if someone is going to get help.
Her response is so amazing and so thoughtful because, I think a lot of us, will hear ourselves in what Lucia is naming, the survival first mindset that many must know, the normalization of pain, the belief that if we can't still stand, we don't need help. The voice that says others have it worse, so who are you to complain? The fear that admitting struggle will somehow dishonor the sacrifices our parents made. And I think this is the big one. But here's what I'm learning. Honoring their sacrifice doesn't mean repeating their suffering. They worked so hard so we could have more. Not just more things, more choice, more peace, more freedom to be human. So how do we actually get past these barriers? And Lucia gave us a roadmap. We asked Lucia, as a professional in the field, what is one resource or tool you wish every Latina had access to for her mental and emotional well-being? And she didn't give us just one, she gave us several. So let's tune in.
Reach out to therapists. A lot of therapists do what's called the sliding scale. And example, I do a sliding scale, and I hold 2 spots for clients that might not be able to afford the full pay range. And so that is something that I do. There's a lot of therapists that do sliding scales and hold certain spots. There may be some that even do pro bono. Also, there is a website called OpenPath, and that's a really good one for reduced therapy. You might not get somebody that's licensed, or maybe you do, but that doesn't mean it's not good quality care. Example, in my practice, I have associates that take on reduced pay rate clients and see them at a very reduced rate. So that is openpath.com. There is also things called, you can call your insurance and ask for a one-time case agreement. So if you do find a therapist and say they take Aetna and you have Blue Cross Blue Shield, then if you reach out to Blue Cross Blue Shield and you request a one-time agreement, you might be able to get a contract. Your therapist might be able to get a contract with that insurance company and be able to see you, and they might be able to pay for your treatment as a result of that. That usually happens, and it's often the case when you transfer from one insurance to another. Therapist takes Aetna, but my insurance recently changed to Blue Cross Blue Shield. Therefore, I'd like to have a 1K single agreement because it's imperative that my therapist continues to see me for continuance of treatment. We all know that in therapy, the number one thing is relationships. In any healthcare system, the number one thing is relationship and somebody having your history. But in therapy, what really treats you is the relationship you have with your therapist and feeling safe and comfortable in order to open up. So what I've noticed is that when somebody starts with a new therapist, you have to start your story over, and that could feel very overwhelming. So having continuance of treatment and having somebody know your story is very imperative to keep with progress of treatment as opposed to regressing, because you might regress if you start over. So there are certain type of lingos that might help in order to be able to kind of convince your new insurance that it would benefit you for you to see your old therapist. And insurances like to operate out of what's going to cost us less money. So if you frame it that way, that might help in insurance being yes. And I have found that a lot of insurances do give therapists single case agreements, but it is up to the client to request those. So advocacy is very important. I think, and there is another thing is requesting a super bill, which is pretty much like a therapeutic receipt, and you take it to your insurance, so you pay out of pocket first. So say the therapist charges $160 and your benefits, out of network benefits, cover $120, then you would only pay the difference, and your insurance pays for the difference in that. There's an app called Thrizer that I use that allows me to charge my rate, and then they collect from the client's insurance. So then the client doesn't even have to pay the full rate. They only pay the difference, and Thrizer pays for it in the meantime until they collect it from the insurance. So it used to be that there was a super bill, and the way that a super bill is that a client gets the super bill, pays out of pocket the full price, and then they have to wait a couple weeks to get reimbursed. Say they get reimbursed $120, but they had to pay $180, and it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get that first reimbursement. Well, Thrizer kind of cuts off that middle person, where they pay the therapist directly. Say they pay the $180 and the insurance covers $120, then the client only pays $60 and Thrizer waits for the money. So that's very cool, but they do charge a percent. But it does alleviate a lot of the stress in chasing down money and then having to wait for that period. So that's another option. So there's plenty of little tricks and nuances. Sometimes you might just want to call a therapist and consult and then ask them, do you have any suggestions? Consultations are usually free. So you can usually find therapists on psychology.com today. That's one of I market there. There are a lot of places where therapists market themselves, but that's that's one that's been around for a very long time. So worst case, call a therapist, consult, and ask them if they have any suggestions for you in terms of how to find treatment for a lower cost. If you have Medi-Cal, there's a lot of mental health agencies that take Medi-Cal. And if you find that there's a waiting list, again, ask for referrals and say, do you know of a place that takes this insurance and there's no wait list? But on places like Psychology Today, you plug in your insurance and it'll give you a list of therapists that are in the community. And it usually says if we're accepting clients or not. We turn on and off our availability. But yeah, that's a way to be able to access, those are a couple ways to be able to access treatment.
Lucia's response is so thorough too. She gave us names, she gave us websites, app scripts, she gave us permission to ask, need the language to ask for it. So she gives proof that there are therapists, Latina therapists, who are waiting for us, holding space, holding spots on their caseloads, specifically for women like us. But here's what I want you to hear. You don't have to do all of this at once. You don't have to call 10 therapists today. You don't have to master the insurance system overnight. Maybe today you just open Psychology Today and look. Maybe you just write down the words open path and sit with them for a while. Healing isn't a race. It's a direction. You deserve to be well. Not someday, not when everything else is perfect, not when you've earned it through enough suffering. Now, as you are, with the weight you're still learning to set down. So, where do we start with this? This week, I want you to borrow Lucia's method, not to fix yourself, just to gather information. Open your phone, open your notes app, write down one of the resources Lucia gave us. Just one. It could be Open Path Collective, Psychology Today, Thrizer, Sliding Scale. That's it. You don't have to call, you don't have to book, just write it down and let it exist somewhere other than the back of your mind. Because here's what I know about us. We are so good at taking care of everyone else. We remember the birthdays, the doctor's appointments, the deadlines. We hold it all, but we forget to hold ourselves. So this week, hold one resource. Just hold it. See how it feels. Your healing doesn't have to be dramatic. It can start with a note on your phone and a promise you're not ready to make yet. But that's still a step and that still counts. Thank you, Lucia, for your wisdom, your vulnerability, and your refusal to let us believe we are alone in this. And to every Latina listening, you're not too much. You're not broken. You're not the first woman in your family to feel this way. And with each small step, you're making sure you won't be the last. I'm Andrea Diaz and empiece con un paso. Hasta la próxima. Bye, amigas.